Hi, my name is Wabo Majavu. I'm a leader in tech. I have a lot of interest in the growth and penetration of tech in Africa. I sit on the board of Angel A Collective, which is a group of CIOs across 20 so African countries. I also am a co-founder for Women in Technology, so that's one of my passions. And yes, everything tech, everything African, and how we get to previously disadvantaged access to connectivity.
Welcome to the African Tech Roundup, Wabo.
Thank you.
You take very seriously being an activist. On one hand, from my reading and my research, an activist for where you believe tech needs to be or grow to as, Africans adopt it. You seem to have a clear sense in your mind for who's not at the party in terms of the conversation about how tech is going to change futures here on the continent. And you clearly care about it enough to have this conversation on a holiday. So give me and anyone who doesn't know you a sense of why that is and what's happening in your head.
Yeah, so there's two things in my head. Firstly, how when we talk disruptive technologies, disruption has got the ability to reset almost and really change futures, enhance futures. But if you're not part of the conversation early enough, then you get left behind. And then what happens is that the digital divide then further expands. So imagine a fast-moving vehicle. The more you enhance it and not the environment, then, that disparity continues. That's the first thing. The second reason is my own personal journey. And there is something that is invisible that we call a glass ceiling for women in tech. And I have navigated this space. I've got a lot of war stories. But let me tell you one thing that has touched me, quite recently. And that is the minute you try and make room for other women, other people that look like you, young girls, then the forces of resistance are quite clear. And so that's why I take it seriously. And for me, it's no longer an option for some people to have access to tech and some not. And one of the ways that we can quickly change that is to remove the barriers. Language being one of them. Access and proximity to urban areas being another one.
You're an executive at one of Africa's largest data center players, a Cassava subsidiary called Africa Data Centers. If one wants to be slightly skeptical, at worst cynical about that position, there seems to be a tension between being someone in that position, but also having this advocacy burden, this idea of interacting with a capitalist reality that, for the most part, doesn't lead with those sensibilities.
So there is a capitalistic, philosophy that, yes, informs where you invest, maybe what service providers you give preference to, and there will be a conflict. And it's purely from a commercial perspective. Any business looks at return in terms of where I invest. So typically, I wouldn't build a data center in Soweto, for example. Whereas what I stand for is taking that digital infrastructure to exactly those areas.
As a pragmatic business decision, or both a business decision and perhaps an ethical, moral one?
It's more than that. It's a dimension that if you are not African, or maybe even come from our local communities, it is a dimension, or let me call it a variable, that you will easily ignore when you look at your potential for growth in markets, when you're doing your market assessments. Because when you look at viability, you look at Africa as a whole, and you then look at lack of access, lack of infrastructure, and you immediately put us into an inferior tier So what you need to do is then stimulate that very environment to then be a consumer and ultimately producer of products. Then what does that do? It makes Africans participate actively in the digital economy. What that requires is, when you're looking at 5 to 10 years in terms of your return period, we all know that digital infrastructure is expensive to lay down. We all know that the returns are slow. And so if you take that long-term view, you're finding that you're then starting to stimulate that very market that you thought was not viable for investment purposes. I'm also sensitive to making an investment at the wrong time, because that can be very expensive for the business. I'll give you a very good example. Data centers are, without power, you really don't have a business. And so if you look at some of our African countries, if you look at the stability just of the power grid, that is a barrier. I think I was talking to someone yesterday who's in the film industry, and, they were talking about building a data center in this country, and it's an economy that's struggling. And so I'm saying to him, because to me, this sounds like a passion project, but there is a way to make your passion a good and profitable story. So you are talking about film, you are talking about entertainment. One of the things that is driving the growth of AI at the moment are your large language models. So local adoption, locally produced, locally sourced. So you're stimulating the economy, you're generating users, which then will require storage ultimately. So don't start from putting down the bricks and mortar. Start from the use case.
It strikes me that someone like you wouldn't be informing this conversation at the highest possible commercial level at a place like Africa Data Centers if it wasn't rooted in an appreciation for why the business exists in the first place, the need to deliver shareholder value, the need for growth. And as part of what is obviously bigger stories we're all covering at this point around, Strive My CEO's announcement of Cassava's partnership with NVIDIA, one has to imagine that alongside a desire to see Africa grow and compete globally is this realization that there might be a counterintuitive notion one might need to have about when and how to invest, and how that conversation might not always make sense to an outsider who's just looking for an opportunity to cash in on the African opportunity, quote unquote. So that is a segue. You self-identified as a strategist. What's the role?
So it is executive strategy and business operations. So looking at growth into different markets, as well as the business operations. So looking at efficiencies and optimizing value for our customers.
I want to understand what would have made you the obvious choice to inhabit this role based on everything else you've done, perhaps leading into this. You mentioned glass ceilings and you mentioned you have amazing stories. I hope to tap into some of them now. So what stood out to me is a history in telco, I think at MTN, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
There's time spent at South Africa's public broadcaster, the SABC, the South African Broadcasting Corporation, which I think would be the biggest public broadcaster in Africa. And then I was also quite curious to see you having served at one of the world's largest listed satellite businesses, Intelsat.
Yes. So Intelsat, my role was market advisor. But really what it meant was we were seeing a decline in the uptake of satellite as a service and as a solution for backhaul services amongst telcos. And with my telco background, I could then, again, I say I'm a strategist, right? So being a strategist is really about finding the solution to a problem. Your problem right now is that your customers are looking for cheaper or perceived cheaper ways of accessing terrain that is really difficult to access. And we're finding satellite in urban areas really declining because it's competing with your fibers, it's competing with your microwaves. And so
this is even before Elon and his Starlink business.
Yes. Intelsat at the time was predominantly geo. So if you look at the orbits and the layers, so your Elons are lower Earth orbit, which is slightly closer to, our atmosphere. And then your geo would then be slightly higher. So if you look at your orbits and your bands. And what we were finding is satellite was becoming a commodity, and we needed to change that. We needed to start selling it as not just a service, but a managed service. So bringing the resources that come with it, as well as the entire value chain. So the management of the Earth station, the management of the remote sites, that entire business being able end to end to deliver it as a managed service is what then shifted the focus for the business.
So from product to capability more.
Exactly. So my role fell within the product space, and that was informed by my previous role, which was the head of product. And as the head of product, on a monthly basis, your role is to look at how is your product performing versus other products year on year, month on month. And where companies started to see sense was in a different type of business model. At the time, I remember there was this rural telephony request for proposals, a bid, basically, where MTN was saying it will partner with a provider that can provide turnkey communication or connectivity to rural areas. And that RFP stated that you deploy, so it's basically a risk-sharing model. So you deploy your own infrastructure, and the bottom line, if it is positive, will be split between MTN and the provider, and you would be operating under the license of MTN.
Sounds like there was a strategist on their side working hard.
Yes, no, definitely. Look, business models, even then, even now, have to change. We have to see more collaboration. That's the only way that we can make significant strides. We have to see the involvement of, if it's a local problem, I always say the best person to solve it is a local person. And at the time, one of the line items in terms of loss for MTN was around, batteries on site, etc. But the minute you give that ownership and custodianship to the community, it is protected by the community, because then that's their only form of connection to their loved ones. So solving a problem with the community is something that sitting in a boardroom you wouldn't think of.
So you reached into your memory bank as far as work you did at Intelsat, and it strikes me that's probably because that was perhaps the most valuable experience to the team at Africa Data Centers in terms of just going, this is the right person we need on board, helping us think strategically and work on these ideas. I wonder what you would point to as formative in those previous roles leading into that. Had you already started to think of yourself as a strategist then? At MTN, for example, were you alert to that as a gap, strategy as a gap that needed to be filled and one that you could follow through with in terms of your career? At the SABC, for instance, where I noticed you didn't quite spend the entire year, did you find maybe that thinking wasn't welcome and that's why you didn't stay long? Those sort of things.
Starting with MTN.
What did you do there?
MTN, I started off as RF engineer. So
what's RF? Sorry, there's going to be a lot of these questions.
Yeah. No, I know. And the irony is, I'm trying to start a podcast called Tech Simplified because, the jargon just has to go out the window.
I'm your first subscriber.
So this is radio frequency. So I did a lot of planning and optimization of the access network. The access network is, you see when you see a cell phone tower?
Mm-hmm.
Cell phone tower to cell phone, that is your access network. Tower to core network, that is your transmission network. And what you do when you're optimizing a network is you're looking at time of usage of that network. You're looking at what time is it congesting, when do I need to expand, when do I need to build new projects. And you also look at, there's what you call ARPU, average revenue per user. So is it viable for me to go and put up a site there? And so to answer your question,
firstly, let me just make sure I understand this. So it would be similar to how if you're a town planner, you're running the numbers to determine when it's time to maybe grow a certain road because the usage of that road demands it, but also maybe you're calculating the value of that road network or that artery to the rest of the city. And if we did open it up, more traffic or more business could come through, it would benefit the city, et cetera, et cetera. Is that a similar kind of sensibility, or am I oversimplifying it?
No. So it is quite similar. So there's an element of forecasting what the demand will be in, let's say, 2 to 3 years. It takes anything from 6 to 12 months, the entire process. So from land acquisition, negotiating with the owners, putting up a tower, getting power to a tower, getting fiber connectivity or microwave to a tower. So you need to have planned for it. And definitely you need to have done the business case in terms of the return.
And had that business case signed off so that the resources are available to do all that work.
Because it's a multidisciplinary team that we're looking at. We're looking at mechanical, we're looking at electrical, we're looking at civils. As a radio planner, my only role is to say, yes, we should go there, or no, we shouldn't.
Right? So you're already honing a strategic muscle. It's just not called that at the time.
It's not called that at the time. And it was very much hands-on as well. So we do a lot of, I don't know if you know about drive testing.
No, I do not. Stop it. You know I don't. No, I'm kidding. But seriously, I mean, I have some sense of what you're talking about. But yeah, break it down.
Okay, fine. Yeah. So drive testing is you get into your car and you've got a cell phone that has got a special software on it where you can basically look at the quality of the signal everywhere you are driving. So let's take Soweto. I can drive around Soweto, inside Soweto. And then what happens is your signal will dip or it will fade. You will drop a call and then you have to redial. So you go back to the office and you pull those logs and you look at where the areas where I'm dropping and what is the reason for dropping. One of the biggest reasons for dropping a call is you were transitioning between two sites. Let's say at the bottom of the hill and at the top of the hill, you served by two sites. But now when it is handing over the signal, there's an issue there. So that type of troubleshooting is different from just a network congesting.
And we're in an area in Johannesburg that's kind of notorious for those drop-offs in certain dips.
There was one area in Joburg that was a nightmare. There were two actually. The first one, it was not a technical issue. It was because the CTO lived there.
No way.
So along the N14.
Right.
Yeah. So we had to just pay extra attention to the N14. But then also along Marlborough, particularly during peak, because you get a lot of traffic, so there's congestion. So you would be dropping a lot of calls at a certain time.
Coming into Sandton.
And so what that required is a tower itself has got, if you look at it, it's got 3 antennas that are facing in 3 different directions. So those you call cells. So you can do different things to the cell. You can allocate a frequency to it. You can tilt it. You can pan it. You can shift it, augment it.
Are these things that cost money?
Yes, they do. I mean, they cost money because... So one of the things that MTN did at the time as well was for Your radio planners and optimizers, they all get cars because you need to be out there looking at the quality of the network. Yes, it costs money. We have to call out technicians if you need to climb the mast.
So this is not happening by remote control or Wabo climbing the tower. So this commands the collaborative effort of other people to solve this problem. Because, when you say it just like that, you list, you pan, you do this, you do that. It almost sounds like something you're doing for remote control from your phone or something.
No. So there are some commands that you can remotely change parameters on the network, but some you do need physical. Anything mechanical, you need someone on site. But to go back to your question around the strategic brain, did that kick in at that time? No. What kicked in at that time was an activist brain. One of the challenges that I had was, one, I was the only woman, female, in the team. And I looked after an area and I went to the manager and I said, I wanted to do a frequency farming or refarming. In a network, you've got frequencies that you allocate to every site so that a frequency is a channel. So when me and you are having a conversation, we are using a frequency. No one else can use that frequency at that point in time if you and I are on it. So you allocate that to multiple sites, to multiple cells. Because remember, I said one site can have 3 cells, and in some instances, you can overlay that. But let me tell you about the activism that I'm talking about. My network was degrading. The cluster was degrading. So we're not talking a tweak here and there. So it needs just replanning. And that is a high risk project in terms of the processes internally. You have to approve a change through a change management board. So once a week, you have multidisciplinary teams, managers, senior people deciding yes, because remember, you also can't have multiple changes happening at the same time. So that's one of the risky things. And then the other things that are quite demanding when it comes to that kind of work is, when there's a rugby match, a soccer match, or concert, the dome and FNB, any stadium, right? Because you have a lot of people in one place. So the optimization and the planning actually happens 3 days before the concert. So we had a matrix structure. So we had a team leader and then you had the regional manager. And my team leader said to me that there's no black woman who's going to touch a network.
Point blank?
Yes. A live network, a black woman, no. So I then went to the NOC, which is Network Operation Center. And at the NOC, you've got a lot of technicians that have been at MTN far beyond my time, far beyond my years, and they had a wealth of knowledge. So I would go to the NOC after hours. I remember at the time I used to stay in Pretoria. So I would go to Mamelodi. There was a place in Mamelodi and you could buy, do you know a sheep's head?
I do know a sheep's head. And for those listening, Mamelodi would be Pretoria's largest township. And so you'd head to the township to go buy a sheep's head. Yes. Which is the delicacy
It's delicacy, yeah. So I'd buy the sheep's head and then I'd also buy so there's the steamed bread that goes with it.
By the way, I should mention at this point, if people haven't already picked up, that you are South African and a Black South African woman whose history is steeped in work here in South Africa. Back to you.
All right, cool. So the sheep's head is called skop, right?
Inhlobo.
Which is inhlobo, yeah. So I used to take that to the operators in the NOC. And they'd be like, oh, yay, right? And then after they eat, they show me all the commands. They show me how to log into all and that's how I trained myself.
You hacked the trade secrets. Within Togo.
That is how I trained myself. They showed me where all the manuals were. They showed me how to download all the manuals. Everything that you needed to know about a network, I knew. I then went to my manager that my team leader reports to. And I said to him, I want to do a frequency plan. And then he said, okay, well, talk me through How are you going to do it? I talked him through how I'm going to do it. And then he says, and rollback plan. I talked him through the rollback plan. And then he's like, okay, fine. You can do it on one condition, that one of the senior people will go with you.
Wow.
So this is where I mentioned the activism came in. And this was really informed by my background. I came from CSIR.
Which is
Council for Scientific Industrial Research.
See, I got to research before you. So that would be what we call here a parastatal, but a government-owned entity that is effectively tasked with managing the country's digital transformation needs, correct?
Yeah. So the CSIR, it's multidisciplinary. So one of the major funders for the CSIR was, at the time, Department of Science and Technology. And then what the CSIR would do was to go out and pitch proposals for research. So we did a lot of work with the NRF as well, which is the National Research Foundation. And what I ended up doing at CSIR was working in the defense, peace, and security systems. So I built a lot of radar applications. And so if you know anything about radar applications...
I don't.
Okay, fine. So it's all about...
Stop it.
Okay, fine. So it's all about you sending out an RF signal. An RF, we said, is radio frequency.
You see, we're building on the learnings of the past.
Yes. So you're sending out an RF signal. So remember, an RF signal, you can't see it. It travels through the airwaves and it can tell you how fast an object is moving. It can give you the size of the object, which you call the radar cross-section. And this is based on the return signal. So you send out a signal, and then if you compare what you sent with what you receive, then there's information embedded in there, right? I felt, listen, I have built RF systems to precision at military level. And now you want to tell me that I can't...
For the friggin' country. So, and here's the thing too. So it strikes me as well that, when you talk about strategy, there's a framework I'm developing, one I call a connectivity framework, that accounts for the importance of relationships, network access, and reputational equity as vital to driving innovation or building innovation ecosystems. Your story is validating this in spades, in that it wasn't just about your ability to do hard things at the highest level with technical excellence, clearly.
Yeah. So relationships, definitely. And this is what I've seen throughout my career. We have people that have spent 17 years in one company, which means that's all you know. I don't come with that. I come with, I don't know what I don't know. This is a new environment and I will discover as much about it as I possibly can. And I will link it to my previous experience. So everything builds up as you make a career move or you climb. And the other thing that was clear for me is whenever I make a career move, it is not going to be lateral. I don't do lateral. I only move up. That's the only move. So in the 3 years that I've given myself, there's also targets and achievements that I need to speak to when I now want to go to the next level. And that's why I will persist. So coming back to relationships, learned all I could, did my first RF planning. So what you do is you would do it overnight. Then in the morning at about 6 a.m., the network starts to pick up. People start to use the network. And then you can see, you compare today's stats with yesterday's stats at the same time. And you see, okay, fine, everything is going well. And then the rest you will incrementally optimize, because it won't be perfect. But overall, it was a success and not doom and gloom and failure because a black woman touched a network. And I think at that time, I had also made a personal decision, which is the kind of manager I wanted to be. I didn't want to be a manager that looks the other way, when there are atrocious comments, sentiments expressed to people of color, you know? And I found that, with my manager, he tried to find a way and he tried to fix, but sometimes you just need to tackle the problem that is not making you proceed and benefit from having diverse opinion in the room. I then moved on to Sentech, which is a state-owned entity and a signal distributor for all the broadcasters, so SABC, ETV, as well as all the radio stations. And I headed up network management system, so monitoring the network, looking at the performance, etc. So exactly the same kind of work that I did before, except now I was heading up the department. And I was rolling out the first digital network management system, because it was at the time that Sentech was moving from analog TV, still moving to DTT, which is digital terrestrial TV.
You're chuckling because it's... I take it this is a very hard thing to do because it's still ongoing.
Yeah, look, it is still ongoing. And it's one of the things that it's about leadership and making a decision.
Let's call a spade a spade. In many different contexts, this would have been long done. And I take it your decision to move on to other things and other places that would enable what is clearly, as you've just said, your desire to grow in roles and to grow upwards rather than laterally, you no doubt found that wouldn't be the place to do that.
So let me tell you what happened, because Sentech is a very unique story. And it is the only company where I stayed for more than 3 years. So let me tell you why. So with the rollout of this network management system and of course this DTT, so the next step really is analog switch off. But you can't leave people without access to media or to broadcast TV.
So what you're talking about is the very hard and difficult thing to go, guys. That world of analog is in our past.
Yeah, because then you need to replace it with something else. And that something else is your set-top box, which you will need to then be able to receive the digital stream.
You're basically turning the whole country into cable users.
Exactly.
Cable television users, for those who are listening in other countries.
Well, it's cable, but also satellite, right? A lot of the network itself, yes, there's fiber. And then there's also direct to home, which is your satellite, which we called the gap filler sites. So wherever you have patches that are not covered by your fiber, you then overlay with satellite. And the business model worked because it also allowed you then to generate regional content. And also, with advertising, you could regionalize advertising. So it really presented a lot of possibilities from a revenue generation. So I had a conversation with the CEO at the time and also my executive, who today is still one of the people that, I will call before I make any major decisions. And I said, look, if we're not going to move forward or we're not moving forward with the transition, what am I monitoring? Because I'm building a network monitoring system. So what am I monitoring? And then he said, all right, look, since you like to solve problems, why don't you go to product and head up product? Because what's going to happen with analog switch off is we're going to see a 40 to 50% dip in revenue. And so you need to then start generating new revenue streams.
You like problems? Well, here's an entrepreneurial opportunity.
So I took on that challenge and I started a managed service offering. And so, the difficulty with developing a brand new product is culture. People are used to doing things a certain way.
with incentives linked to the way they've been doing it.
And there's a learning curve. Because remember, if I'm suddenly going to be expected, if there's a call out, I'm not just looking after the transmission site for network. I'm also looking at whoever is co-located at that site. It now means I must learn the technologies of the different OEMs. OEM is original equipment manufacturer. So there's a learning curve. But the business case made sense because what we're saying is you would have driven to site anyway.
It'll make sense to someone who's incentivized to ensure the bottom line is fed, not necessarily the individual whose incentive was previously linked to an easier job and less work when they arrive to site.
Yeah, exactly what you said. You are expanding the scope of my work. There's definitely going to be more call-outs. It's not just Sentech equipment, it's third-party equipment and. But the way that we had structured it was such that we put a proposal together with one of the towercos. And we said to them, look, you've got experience from everything from, your billing engine to how you measure time spent on site. So we can have almost and these are the collaborations that I'm talking about. If you're going to go to market with something new, you do have to collaborate. And those discussions were quite advanced. So the issue now comes with change and change management. And I think I can say the change leader in me then started to materialize.
When you think about that change management element, is what you learned at Sentech effectively culture can eat strategy for breakfast, and good strategy has to account for that?
100%. We stop at strategy and the defining of the strategy. And to be honest with you, I've never seen a bad strategy. It's the execution, it's the adoption, it's the rolling out. You have to be willing to take risks. You have to be willing to make mistakes. You have to be bold in some of the decisions that you make. So I mentioned to you, the executive that I reported to that I still talk to today. One of the things he taught me was, Wabo, make a decision. Then we can talk about whether or not that was a good decision or whether or not we need to change anything or that was a bad decision. Right now, there's nothing to talk about because you haven't made a decision. I thought, okay, well, I will make a decision and see how this goes. I don't know if you know this, but in that, I think, I was there for 6 years. That was the time that Sentech went on strike. And the union at Sentech had probably never been stronger, unified. Because remember, to go on strike when you're probably in middle to low band salary-wise, you get that certificate to go on strike, but it's an unpaid strike. So it needs a level of camaraderie that says we will stand together, and for as long as we stand together, the company will respond. And the shop steward and the leader of the union at the time was Stephen Zehla. So unrelated to the strike, the point here is his leadership. People listen to him. And so if I want to introduce a new product, I want to convince people of new ways of working, I want to sell this to the people, the best person that's going to sell this to the people is the person that people listen to. And so I approached Stephen and I said, I have a vacancy within product. And that obviously bumped now to managerial level. Are you interested? And he says, yes. And that is one, let me call it unpopular decision that I made, because as management, as management, we are struggling with employees because of the union, and you're taking the head of the union
and bringing him into the penthouse suite.
You're bringing.
You're inviting him upstairs in his overalls.
That was the best decision I've ever made. So I said to Stephen, look, there's this new product that I want us to roll out. And Stephen, because you're good with because that's all it is, right? Stakeholder management. So let's see, can we work with municipalities? So you're basically taking the same skill set, you're applying it to a different stakeholder, and product management can be learned. It's about business cases and storytelling, okay? Where I need you, which you already have, is this. When it comes to, understanding profitability, I can teach you that. But really where the value for me in you having you in this position is this. So that was also at a time where one of the product managers who had been there for 20 plus years, he was about to retire. And so he came to me, and he was a product manager for radio. So he said to me, his role is so complex and critical, because we've got the 18 public broadcaster stations, we've got the community broadcasters. My retirement is really a risk. So then I said, okay, so what is your suggestion? And his suggestion was, he's retiring in 6 months, so let's extend that by 12 months while we search for the right candidate, because it is so complex. It is so intricate, right? So I said, okay, because it is so complex and because it is so intricate, you know what we're going to do? We're going to hire someone while you're here, so that we make sure in the 6 months that you're here, you are handing over, and there's someone who is shadowing you. And this is what I said. I don't believe there was anyone who was born radio product manager. So I'm not sure when it became too complex for anyone else to do it. Okay? So we're going to get someone to shadow you, and we're going to get that person while you're still here. And we will not be extending your contract.
Hi, Wabo.
And again, that was a shock move, right? To say, what's going to happen? Right? I firmly believe anything can be learned if you unbundle it, decouple it, decompose it. And Stephen became that radio product manager. So he was handling 2 portfolios. And he did it with ease because it was about profitability. Remember, with a mature product, there's very little that you're doing on a day-to-day. It is when you are building a new product, where you're taking a new product from concept to business case approval, to prototype, to then
literally live in the market, making you money.
Your go-to-market. Yes, your entire go-to-market. Who are you partnering with? Where is it positioned? How are you going to price it? That is the difficult part. Babysitting a product that is mature and it's as old as you have been here, I don't think that is a complex task. But we'll see.
So at this point, do you have a bucket for what you were doing over there that is called strategy? There's a lot of sort of equity in being a person who cares about collaboration. But I think in terms of actually mapping it into a strategy and executing on it, there are a lot of nuances, just learning from your experience, that have to do with people, with change, that build on your technical capability. So you can't come to the party and not know what RF is. And I think sometimes there isn't enough technical excellence at the strategy level, but at the same time, sometimes is technical excellence, but not sufficient appreciation for what it takes to collaborate and collaborate well, or change, or understand how to influence culture and deploy people, challenge norms and traditions. That to me is the embodiment of what I now am going to think about when I think about you vis-a-vis you being a strategist. Is any of what I've just said stuff you started to think about in that way when you were going through the things you're talking about now?
I had already started surrounding myself with a lot of mentors. I think I have about 10 mentors. And some of the decisions that I made are decisions where you do a decision tree, right? So you map out scenarios. What if, what if, what if? So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, yes, collaboration, but the right kind of collaboration. So what's important when you're mapping out your stakeholders is understanding the agenda of each of your stakeholders. The Tower Co that I mentioned that we said we would collaborate with, they have an agenda, right? Because they haven't tapped into the SOE-owned towers. And those were prime real estate, really, really high, sitting on, I don't know if you've seen, when you're driving into a town, any town, like a small town, the first thing you would see is this tower. So they had this unbelievable height. So the minute you have that height, you can then start using spaces below where they've mounted their antennas. And that's prime real estate if you are a tower operator. So you have to understand what is in it for my stakeholder. That's the trick to collaboration. You know what you want. Yes, that's great. But know what the other person wants. So they wanted access to, a portfolio of prime real estate from a tower and telco perspective that they could then offer to their end consumers, which is your telcos. And so there was value exchange there.
It wasn't just you going, we need a new product, let me come up with one. It was you really sussing where everyone was at and what they needed and what would feed them and their agendas, and looking for where all of that would overlap and then creating a product there.
And also self-awareness, right? I believe that any business superpower is knowing who you are. So know your limitations, know what you can't do. I knew that Sentech was not going to be able in 3 months to build CRM systems, call out logging systems overnight, an established conveyor belt that a tower co already has. So we can gain from that. We can use that to trade as you are building up and acquiring your customer base in this new world. But also remember, at some point, you'll then become their competition because you can then service the telcos and you are able to integrate some of their systems onto your systems to save on costs. That's where more than strategy, it was more understanding stakeholders and the power of stakeholders so that you don't reinvent the wheel.
We've come interestingly full circle to where our conversation started, because I asked you about your activism and asked about that tension between activism and the commercial intent of, the very commercial interests you are embedded in as an executive. And it's occurred to me that you straddle that tension by being a strategist, actually.
Yeah, so it has to make sense, right? And that's why I go back to, if you're going to do a stakeholder mapping, what is the agenda of each of your stakeholders? And then where are the areas of alignment? And that I've learned over the years. There's a buzzword now around ecosystems, but it really is about me using a network that is already in existence, so I don't have to, reinvent anything. And this now comes back to networking and really knowing who to call for what. One of my mentors said to me, every time your phone rings, it's either costing you or bringing you money, and you have to decide. And to make connections doesn't cost me anything. It gives me almost something in the bag for me to be able to call on you some other day when I need a connection or I need a contact. And so networks are becoming increasingly important. Relationships are becoming increasingly important. And that's why we see ecosystem collaborations being a buzzword.
I see it too as an investment in connectivity, as I put it, the relationships, network access, reputational equity, something you seem to have all three of as well. Like listening to you, there's the relationships you've not just gone, I believe in the importance of them. You've actually demonstrated anecdotally on key relationships that actually led to important breakthroughs. Network access, obviously tapping into nodes of second order connectivity that now delivers on value, whether that's the right hire that does that or commercial partnership. And then from a reputational equity perspective, I'm here with just my microphone and my laptop, but you have a whole team managing your projection of where you believe Africa's digital transformation needs to go as a matter of your own personal initiative, not something you're doing as part of executive KPIs or, if anything, quite apart from anything you're doing day to day as an executive. I'm sure it is very additive, but it strikes me that you are living this ecosystem buzzword. Where does this come from? I know you studied your undergrad in Malaysia, your master's at Wits, but you studied AI before it was a buzzword. Did that influence you? Is it because of this maybe interesting layering of working in public sector first, but then private sector, and then public sector again, and then private sector again, with all this technical background that you have? I'm listing all the things that I think have to do with how we get to this conversation, sitting here with your cameraman over there, with me with the mic over here on this couch. Fill in the blanks. This ecosystem vibe, like how? How?
All right. So I'm going to try and unlayer your question. Starting with where I studied, which is Malaysia.
And you studied engineering, sorry, is that right?
Yes. So my undergrad is in electrical engineering. And yes, I did my master's at Wits. But I got exposed to, let me call it a melting pot of cultures, where we had students from Vietnam, Chad, Sudan, all African countries, right? And the driver behind that was Petro SA. So any country where Petro SA either had a drilling operations, okay, with that country, or upstream operations with that country, then they would offer 10 bursaries per year. So the country then has to look for the top 10 in terms of maths and science to send to the university. And that's how I made it there. And I can compare it with local universities because I did a year at university, it's now UKZN. I did University of Natal. I did Pietermaritzburg, and then I did part year in Durban. And the difference between the two was that in South Africa, in an engineering class, in your first year, you're told, look left, look right. 2 of you is not going to make it. Only 1 of you is going to, right? In that environment where everybody's away from home, the only thing that matters is your GPA, right?
Your grade point average.
Yeah, your average. Maintain your average. Everybody's chasing the dean's list by virtue of you being here. So the motivation and the drivers are extremely different. One is more, it's positioned as an extreme sport. Whereas on the other side, it's positioned as you're here, you can make it, you just need to, right?
Apply yourself.
You just need to apply yourself, yeah. And the other difference that I can point to, at the time, in South African universities, there's what you call a DP, which is I think it's your average throughout the year.
Yeah, that would be your due performance. So it's the minimum threshold of performance that keeps you from being kicked out of varsity, basically.
Yeah. So, and that is what qualifies you to write an exam. On the other side, what qualifies you to write an exam is your attendance of lectures. So you may have flunked a test, but as long as your attendance is sitting at 70%, then you're allowed to write an exam. And why I think that's quite important to talk about is people go through different phases in their lives. Life happens, okay? I could have lost a mother in term 2 and not written a test. Anything could have happened. I could have been ill. But as long as you have that 70% attendance, there is a chance that you are then going to be able to apply yourself. We all know students and work well under pressure. You'll stay up all night. You will study because you've been to class, and then you will pass.
You will adapt, actually. So that what you're saying is really, it sounds like there's an emphasis on, one, showing up, being present and being available to soak up what we believe you need to be exposed to as part of this curriculum. And then we'll trust that you will have an opportunity to demonstrate whether you've applied yourself sufficiently, all things told.
Yeah. And so that's what I found. And the pass rate was quite high. And there's also something about feeling like there's an objective to be met here, so I can go home. And so when you do go home, you want to make a difference because you want to make those years count. I don't believe my government sent me somewhere not to make a difference, not to be part of the solution. If I say to you, you're surrounded by the top 10 smartest people in multiple countries, you are going to perform. It's an environment that just feeds. It's a snowball effect. And I remember in one of my programming languages, I used to have someone help me, and he was Vietnamese. And the first time I saw what he goes through when he studies, where he's got 2 dictionaries. He's got a Vietnamese dictionary, he's got an English dictionary, and then he's got the textbook. And then I thought, hang on, he is getting A's, but he's having to translate and put in 3, 4, 5 times the work that I have to. And for me, everything is in English. So it really gives you a different perspective on the things that you take for granted. And again, it's about you're not going to let your country down. You need to go out there, perform, and then come back. And then you asked me a question about studying AI before AI was a buzzword.
Was there a great professor who had some thinking you want to sit under?
So for my final year project, and that's why the role of lecturers in shaping our futures is so important. There was a professor, Professor Varun Jyoti. He's always been in signal processing. And he explained signal processing to me in a way that made so much sense. And he was milestones apart from any other lecturer I ever had. So I then fell in love with signal processing because of him. And for my final year project, because I wanted him to be my supervisor. And he said he's full. He can't take on any more students unless I'm willing to come in on a Saturday. I said, I'll do it. And then I would do my consultations on a Saturday. Now, moving to South Africa, I wanted to work with signal processing. And if you know anything about signal processing, you'll know that there's a lot of stats because you have to model systems that are unknown. You have to model the response of a system to unknown variables. That's what signal processing is about. And so there's a lot of stats involved, which then leads to AI.
giving you predictive sensibilities
Yeah.
in unprecedented ways.
Yeah. And I mean, the fundamentals of AI, which are you've got a set of data and you're going to put it through cycles of training to try and predict, to try and forecast. And one of the areas that I focused on was on classification, automatically classifying words. And I built one of the first few web crawlers. I don't know if you know now, every website you go to, if you want to register, it'll say verify that
You're a real person?
verify that you're a real person. It's because of all the bots. Yeah, so I built a bot to scrape all the weather websites. After that, start classifying the terminology, remove joining words like and, the. So semantically, they don't add value. So you then start building ranking mechanisms for words of importance, which is similar to some of the algorithms that search engines use to rank web pages or to rank, results when you search. So I started building those ranking algorithms. Signal processing will ultimately lead you to stats. And then stats led me to using AI to try to predict, to try to monitor. And so at the time, there was a problem with fires in the Western Cape. By scraping all the news portals, you're able to then start looking at a change climatically. Combine that with satellite imagery, so that's image processing, and you can then start to predict where a fire will occur. That's one of the things that I did. And I then met my supervisor, Professor Marwala, who was at WITS at the time before he moved to UJ. And the formulation of my topic was then, guided by obviously my passion and his areas of expertise. At the time, he was the head of electrical and electronic engineering at WITS. But one person that made me fall in love with AI was Terence Van Zyl. And he's now the Nedbank chair of AI at UJ. He's the person that, in my view, was a visionary. We would have these conversations. He says, look, with AI, you can solve a security problem. You can solve a banking app problem. The scope in terms of implementation for this field in particular is endless.
Well, I'm just recognizing that strategy meets foresight here, and AI is this binding factor. I'm pretty sure it's safe to say you could not have seen that coming.
A friend of mine said to me, what's the quickest way for me to know or learn AI without all the million apps that are out there? And so I said to her, well, first of all, how is your stats? Okay. And she's like, stats how? I'm like, isn't your undergrad a BSc? And then she says, yes. I'm like, okay. So if your stats is good, then you can actually use the AI tool and ask it to break down AI for you. But what you must do is then ask it to give you references. And then those references will take you to the fundamentals. And then any term, machine learning, deep learning, any term that you come across, you go back and you feed it to the tool again. And then using that cycle, you will get somewhere in terms of advancements of the fundamentals. So she's a trader. Number 2, ask it how to execute on your daily deliverables. A lot of what you do is trading. So you have to predict where the next price point for a certain equity is going to be.
And judge signals.
And so one of the first things that you're going to have to do is training data. And you guys have a Bloomberg terminal. So you've got rich data sets to train. And training is really, you input data, get an outcome, there's an error rate. Second iteration, the error rate reduces. Third iteration, the error rate. So that's what we mean by training. And there's different signals that you guys are looking at. You're looking at moving averages. You're looking at MACDs. You're looking at... So there's the technical analysis. But what is going to be a little bit tricky is going to be market sentiment. Because market sentiment is a little bit more instantaneous. It's very difficult to predict. So you will have to have a real-time element to it. Alternatively, leave room for that market sentiment. And for me, it was, the theory of missing data. What would the picture look like with some data missing? And then you train your model to predict what that variable should be.
You're a ritual distiller and publisher of your learnings and your insights. There's any number of different stakeholders that you encounter as part of your, call it media making or your publishing, which for someone who's decided to sit in their office all day and not do any of that interaction, there's a lot out in the ecosystem you're not perceiving and interacting with, right?
People reach out to me now because I've got a team, I've got a PR team, so they look at how we can assist. We receive a lot of proposals of what people want to do. Some can code, some can't code, so there's different levels of expertise. But one of the things that we've also decided to do is to build a community of coders. Back in the day, we used to have, I think it was bought now, GitHub.
Yes, I think acquired by Microsoft.
It was, yes. So GitHub was your debugging. You post your code, someone else will come and assist you.
And now it's actually a key component to Microsoft's AI strategy because that paired with their interest in ChatGPT, the depth of their developer insights through GitHub, and of course their live insights through the active use of Copilot via their Office suite. So you're thinking in terms of the ecosystem play that needs to be in place to actually deliver the result.
Yeah. What we are currently working on now is a GitHub in native languages. There's no machine that understands English. It sounds funny when I say it, right? Machine language is ones and zeros, which is binary. So anyone can code in any language. What we now need to do is build a compiler. And so we're going to start with Swahili because we've got a huge developer network in Kenya.
Also, top 3 most spoken African language.
Most spoken African language. So we're going to go wide first with Swahili to prove the concept. And then we're going to bring it back home. And we can have isiZulu, we can have isiXhosa,
Sindebele.
We can have all the African languages. You can code and you're then building a community that is helping each other. And speaking of stakeholders, I work a lot with rural communities remotely. So every Sunday, I will have I can call it a masterclass of where to begin, how to begin your tech journey, take them through the different portals. So, for example, if you look at your hyperscalers, Microsoft, AWS, Oracle, all of them have got a learning path for web development, for web services. We can start developing our own APIs. We can start doing things in our own languages. And that moves us from being consumers to being producers. Because once you solve a problem locally, then you've taken care of the demand. Your next problem is scaling.
This has been a conversation on strategy, on foresight, and now connectivity and getting the work done. Wabo Majavu, thank you so much for being on the African Tech Roundup.
Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure.